Hello again. This is Bob Milam from the Utah High School Football Officials Association, members of the Utah High School Activities Association. And today we're going to do a brief update on the new overtime rules highlights for UHSAA sanctioned games in the state of Utah. So let's get started. It's a brief video, but it's important to note the rule changes that have been enacted for 2023. So an overview, we're going to cover today briefly what to do before the overtime period starts. We'll review with chain crew, game management, coaches, captains, talk about the coin toss and subsequent options, and other things that need to be covered before overtime. During overtime, this is where we'll talk about the new rule revision, and then we'll sum everything up. And please contact me with any questions that you might have. So let's jump right in. The background. Well, before we get to the UHSAA approved procedures, we need to make sure we're familiar with the Federation rule procedures for resolving tied games. This is covered in Rule 311, the note, on page 41 of your rule book. Also, resolving tied games in rule book on page 87 covers some important topics that need to be learned in order to execute the Utah procedure properly. So the Utah procedures that are different from the Federation procedures can be found here at the UHSAA website under football and football overtime, and it's a PDF file. And it gives you about 3 pages of detailed overtime rules, including how to resolve penalties, how to deal with turnovers, and many other scenarios. So please go to this site and download this page. In fact, I recommend that you download it, print it off, and attach it to the clipboard. If you record fouls on a clipboard, have it with you at the game. This rule and these rules apply to all UHSAA sanctioned games, regardless of the level, whether they be varsity or sub-varsity games. So just remember that this overtime procedure is still in effect even if you're working a sub-varsity game. Okay, before each overtime period starts, you need to review with the coaches and captains. And there's a 3-minute intermission between the overtime periods, 1 timeout per overtime period, and no carryover from regulation. Now remember that an overtime period consists of 1 series for each team. So the overtime period is a little bit different than an overtime series. Timeouts called after an overtime period ends are charged to the subsequent overtime period. And make sure that you review with the coaches and captains any carryover penalty enforcement from regulation time or previous overtime periods before they start, if applicable. This is important to their selection of options as moving forward. Where will the ball be placed for each scenario, for example, is something that the coach may want to know before he makes his decision about starting on offense or defense. Now, the new UHSAA overtime rules. So let's talk about those. First, the coin toss and the subsequent option. The visiting team calls the one and only coin flip. The winner chooses either offense, defense, or end of the field, and the loser has the remaining option. Then subsequent options, the teams alternate the order of choice for subsequent overtime periods. There is only 1 coin flip, so the loser then chooses in the second overtime period, and that option alternates each time there is an overtime period. The second intermission after the first overtime period, the 2-minute intermission after the first overtime period, that is, and the coin chip loser will choose in the second overtime period. Now, here's what's new. This is what's changed. All of the stuff that we've covered up to this point has been on the books for several years. So just as a reminder, and that sets the stage for what's to come. So in the second overtime period, teams must now go for 2 points on the try. That's starting with the second overtime period. The first overtime period will not change. The third overtime period and beyond Each series will consist of one play, a 2-point try only. So that's the difference of what we're doing this year versus what's been done in the past. And hopefully we'll be resolving these overtime games a lot quicker. So we begin 1st and 10 at the B 25-yard line. Normal game scoring and the 25 and 40-second play clock still applies. No game clock, however, is used. Normal line to gain rules apply, and the game ends when the score is not tied after the completion of an overtime period. Now, it's important if you're officiating games involving out-of-state teams that this procedure be discussed at some point with the visiting coach so that they know what they're in for when they go to overtime, because other states do not do it the same way that Utah does. So, turnovers during overtime. If you have a turnover during overtime and it's during a scrimmage down, those turnovers are live. Turnovers during try downs, however, are dead, just like they are in our regular regulation time rules. Live ball possession during a down by Team B will end Team A's series, and if A regains possession during that down, they must score. And realize that once we have live ball possession during a down by Team B, there are some different penalty enforcements that are listed in the rules, so make sure that you study those. All right, well, let's review what we've talked about here in this brief video. Review the rules, the rule book, and the UHSAA website. Make sure that you print the overtime rules, give them to your foul reporter to carry on the clipboard with them. Review what to do before overtime starts. Make sure everybody is involved, is informed. Remember, we only do one coin toss, and then subsequent options will alternate. The first overtime, we play our normal rules that we've always had. Second overtime, you must go for 2. And third and subsequent overtimes consist of one 2-point try only. Finally, have an exit plan ahead of time. Know who's going to escort you back to your locker room, and make sure that that pathway is well defined and clear. So get out of Dodge with everything intact. And with that, that concludes our brief video on the new overtime rules. Please contact me with any questions and have a great season.